The pristine corridors of Space Station Xylos gleamed under soft ambient lighting. Alara Vance walked with measured steps, taking in the meticulous engineering that characterized Cthar architecture. As the station's newest human resident and visiting biological engineer, she'd spent her first week simply adjusting to the environment. The Cthar, with their 6 limbs and iridescent exoskeletons, had created a marvel of efficiency, cleanliness, and technological sophistication. The microgravity laboratory section is ahead, Engineer Vance, Professor Zorpax announced, his primary set of limbs gesturing toward an airlock door. The Cthar's metallic exoskeleton caught the light as he moved, creating dancing patterns of blue and silver across the corridor walls. "My students are prepared for your visit." Alara nodded, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I'm looking forward to it, Professor. And please, call me Alara." Earth's exchange program emphasizes collegial relationships. Zorpax's mandibles clicked softly, his species equivalent of a polite acknowledgement. Alara had learned it was the closest thing to a smile Cthar physiology allowed. As the leading xenobiologist on Xylos, Professor Zorpax commanded respect from all quarters. But his interaction with the human exchange scientist had been marked by a formal stiffness that Alara still found challenging to navigate. "As you wish, Alara." The professor's multifaceted eyes blinked in sequence. A mannerism Alara had noticed indicated slight discomfort with breaking protocol. "My students are most interested in human adaptive physiology. Several are pursuing medicine." The airlock hissed open to reveal a spacious laboratory, where gravity registered at approximately 0.4 Earth normal. Inside, 7 Cthar students stood beside various workstations, their postures instantly straightening at the sight of Professor Zorpax. Their exoskeletons displayed the subtle blue-green hue characteristic of younger Cthar. "Honored students," Zorpax announced, "Engineer Alara Vance will observe our gravitational adaptation experiments today. You may proceed with explanations of your research." One student stepped forward, her movements displaying the characteristic grace of the Cthar. "I am Lyra," she introduced herself, antennae quivering slightly. "My research focuses on circulatory adaptation to variable gravity environments." Another student moved beside her. "Quell," he stated simply, "neural response patterns under gravitational stress." The introductions continued, each student stating their name and research focus with precise economy of words. Alara made mental notes, recognizing she'd need time to differentiate between them visually. While Cthar found each other instantly distinguishable, humans often struggled with the subtle variations in their exoskeleton patterns and limb proportions. "I'd love to hear more about your projects," Alara said warmly after the introductions concluded. "On Earth, we've made significant strides in biological adaptation techniques, but the Cthar approach to gravitational biology is renowned throughout the galaxy." Quell's antennae twitched with what Alara had come to recognize as academic excitement. "Our methodologies prioritize theoretical perfection before practical application. Professor Zorpax has taught us that deviation from established protocols introduces unacceptable variables." "Indeed," Zorpax confirmed. "The Cthar approach eliminates the error-prone intuition that characterizes many species' scientific endeavors." Alara bit back a diplomatic retort about the value of intuition in research. Cultural exchange meant respecting differences in approach, even when they contradicted her own scientific philosophy. Instead, she followed the students to the first demonstration station. Lyra activated a complex apparatus that generated a localized variable gravity field. This simulation demonstrates the differential pressure adaptations in Cthar circulatory fluids versus theoretical human blood flow models, she explained, manipulating the controls with practiced precision. As the demonstration proceeded, Alara leaned forward to examine the data readouts more closely. The motion placed her near a partially disassembled component on a neighboring workbench. Suddenly, a warning light flashed. "Calibration error," announced one of the students from across the room. The gravity apparatus fluctuated, creating a momentary surge that sent several unsecured items shifting across surfaces. A sliver of metallic material, part of the disassembled component, dislodged and slid across the bench, catching Alara's forearm as she moved to stabilize herself. She felt a sharp sting, followed by the warm sensation of blood welling from a cut approximately 5 centimeters long on her arm. The wound was clean and straight, bleeding steadily but not profusely. "Just a scratch," Alara said immediately, pressing her other hand against the wound. The laboratory's environmental sensors had already detected the biological anomaly. A high-pitched alert tone sounded, and the laboratory's lighting shifted to an amber hue. "Biological containment protocol activated," announced the station's AI in a calm voice. "Unknown organic substance detected." "That's just my blood," Alara explained, reaching for a nearby cleaning cloth to press against the cut. The Cthar students had already moved away, forming a perfect semicircle at what appeared to be a predetermined safe distance. Zorpax approached cautiously, his scanner already extended from a compartment in his exoskeleton. "Please remain still, Engineer Vance," he instructed. "The medical protocol for xenobiological fluid exposure must be followed precisely." "It's really not serious," Alara insisted. "Just a minor cut." But the Cthar were already in motion, executing what was clearly a well-rehearsed emergency procedure. Two students activated a mobile medical platform that glided to Alara's position. Another interfaced with the station's central medical AI. "Biological integrity breach detected in human exchange officer," reported Quell with perfect clinical detachment. "Requesting immediate medical assessment." Within minutes, Alara found herself being escorted, or rather, politely but firmly directed, toward the station's medical bay. Professor Zorpax walked alongside her, scanners still actively monitoring her vital signs. "I appreciate the concern," Alara said, still pressing the cloth to her arm. "But on Earth, this would barely warrant a bandage. It's a superficial cut. Human physiology is remarkably fragile," Zorpax replied, his tone suggesting he was reciting established fact rather than offering an opinion. "Your epidermal layer provides minimal protection against pathogens. The station environment, while sterilized to accommodation standards, contains numerous microorganisms adapted to Cthar biology that could prove problematic for your system." The medical bay doors parted automatically as they approached. Inside, the space was immaculate, surfaces gleaming with a faint blue luminescence that Alara knew indicated continuous sterilization fields. Medical equipment, far more sophisticated than anything available in Earth's best facilities, lined the walls and ceiling. The Cthar medical students had somehow arrived ahead of them and were already preparing various instruments. Lyra approached with what appeared to be a diagnostic scanner, while Quell prepared a clear solution in a medicinal atomizer. "Please be seated on the examination platform," Lyra instructed, indicating a contoured surface that adjusted its shape as Alara approached. Slightly exasperated, but not wanting to cause offense, Alara complied. "The cut is approximately 5 centimeters long and perhaps 2 millimeters deep at most. It's already clotting normally." Lyra held the scanner over Alara's arm, maintaining a precise distance of exactly 3 centimeters above the wound. A holographic display materialized, showing a magnified, layer-by-layer analysis of the injury. "Initial assessment complete," Lyra announced. "Epidermal layer fully compromised. Dermal layer penetration approximately 2.3 millimeters. Capillary damage evident in sectors 4 through 11 of the affected region." Another student approached with a more sophisticated scanning device, commencing microbial assessment and foreign body detection. Professor Zorpax observed the proceedings with evident approval. "Our medical facilities are programmed with complete human physiological parameters." The exchange program provided extremely thorough baseline data. Alara watched as the students continued their elaborate diagnostic procedure, fighting the urge to tell them she could have cleaned and bandaged the cut in under a minute. Instead, she decided to use the situation as a learning opportunity about Cthar medical approaches. What's the standard treatment protocol for this type of injury among your people? She asked. Kthar exoskeletons do not sustain injuries analogous to soft tissue damage, Zorpax explained. Our medical treatments focus on joint integrity, sensory receptor maintenance, and internal organ optimization. The scanner in Lyra's hands emitted a series of tones. The student studied the results with intense focus before turning to Professor Zorpax. The diagnostic system has classified the injury as tissue damage Category 8, she reported formally. Alara blinked in surprise. Category 8? That sounds serious. Indeed, Zorpax confirmed. The classification system ranges from 1 to 10, with 10 representing complete tissue failure. But it's just a cut, Alara protested. Look, the bleeding has almost stopped already. Quell approached with a datapad. The treatment protocol for Category 8 tissue damage requires immediate microvascular reconstruction to prevent potential infection and ensure optimal structural restoration. The system recommends preparing for surgical intervention within the next standard hour. Surgery. Alara couldn't keep the incredulity from her voice. That's completely unnecessary. Human skin heals minor cuts like this naturally. Perhaps by human standards, Zorpax replied, his tone suggesting polite skepticism. However, our medical systems are calibrated to provide optimal outcomes, not merely adequate ones. Alara watched as the students began preparing various instruments and sterile fields. The situation was escalating far beyond what was reasonable, but she could see that arguing against their established protocols would be difficult. The Kthar approached medicine with the same precision and adherence to theoretical perfection that characterized all their scientific endeavors. I understand your concern for my well-being, she tried again, but human medicine has thousands of years of experience with treating injuries like this. A simple antiseptic and perhaps a few stitches are all that's required. Stitches. Lyra's antennae twitched in what Alara had learned indicated confusion or surprise. You refer to the primitive practice of using thread to approximate wound edges. Yes, Alara confirmed. It's still a standard treatment for clean lacerations. Effective and minimally invasive. Professor Zorpax made a sound that Alara interpreted as the Kthar equivalent of clearing one's throat. While we respect cultural medical traditions, Engineer Vance, you are currently under the protection of Station Xylo's medical protocols. Our system has determined the optimal treatment path. As the students continued their preparations, Alara saw instruments being arranged that appeared designed for some form of microsurgery. Subtle manipulator fields were being calibrated, and what looked like synthetic tissue scaffolding was being prepared. At minimum, Alara said, trying to keep frustration from her voice, I'd like access to my personal first aid kit before we proceed further. Zorpax's primary eyes focused on her with intensity. You brought a medical device aboard? Just basic supplies, Alara explained. Standard issue for Earth Exchange personnel. Nothing dangerous or exotic. Antiseptics, bandages, basic medications. The professor seemed to consider this request, multiple limbs shifting in what Alara had come to recognize as a gesture of internal deliberation. Very well, he finally agreed. If access to this device will help calm your concerns before the procedure, that seems reasonable. Where's this kit located? In my quarters in the storage compartment beside my work terminal, Alara replied. Thank you. Zorpax gestured to one of the students not directly involved in the medical preparations. Retrieve Engineer Vance's medical device for examination and potential use. As the student departed, Alara remained seated on the examination platform, watching the elaborate preparations continue around her. The Kthar worked with impressive efficiency, each movement precise and purposeful. Under different circumstances, she would have found their medical techniques fascinating from a professional perspective. The diagnostic system indicates elevated heart rate and stress hormone levels, observed Quell, studying a biosensor readout. Should we administer a calming agent? That won't be necessary, Alara said quickly. I'm just concerned about the extent of the proposed treatment relative to the injury. Lyra approached with what appeared to be a dermal regeneration matrix. This synthetic scaffold will integrate with your natural tissue to accelerate healing and minimize scarring. The procedure requires precise microvascular integration to ensure optimal nutrient flow to the regenerating cells. Alara nodded politely, but her mind was racing. The Kthar approach to medicine clearly prioritized technological intervention over natural healing processes. While impressive, their treatments seemed disproportionate for minor injuries, like using a quantum computer to calculate simple addition. The student dispatched to retrieve her first aid kit returned, carrying the compact medical container with careful precision, as if handling potentially dangerous material. "Here is the requested medical device," the student announced, presenting the kit to Professor Zorpax rather than directly to Alara. "Thank you," Alara said, reaching for the kit. "If you'll allow me, I can demonstrate a standard earth treatment for this type of injury." Zorpax hesitated, then placed the kit on a sterilization field beside the examination platform. "You may access your device, but please explain each component before use. Our safety protocols require full documentation of all foreign medical applications." "Of course," Alara agreed, opening the compact kit. The Kthar students gathered closer, their curiosity evidently overcoming some of their clinical detachment. Alara removed an antiseptic wipe and held it up. "This contains a mild antiseptic solution, hydrogen peroxide and chlorhexidine," she explained. "It cleans the wound and prevents infection." She opened the package and began gently cleaning around the cut on her arm. The Kthar observed with intense focus. "The solution appears to cause a mild exothermic reaction," noted Quell, scanning the process. "That's normal," Alara assured him. "The stinging sensation indicates it's working against potential pathogens." Next, she removed a small package containing a curved surgical needle and sterile suture thread. The reaction from the Kthar was immediate. Several students moved back slightly, antennae rigid with what Alara recognized as alarm. "You intend to pierce your epidermal layer repeatedly?" Lyra asked, her vocal tones higher than normal. "It's a standard medical procedure," Alara explained calmly. "The sutures will hold the edges of the wound together while it heals naturally." Professor Zorpax's limbs shifted in obvious discomfort. "This seems unnecessarily invasive and primitive. Our regeneration matrices would heal the tissue without additional trauma." "I understand," Alara replied, preparing the needle and thread. "But I'd prefer to use a method I'm familiar with, and one that's been proven effective for human physiology over centuries." Before Zorpax could object further, Alara began the process of stitching her wound. With practiced movements, the result of mandatory field medical training for all Earth exchange scientists, she placed the first suture at one end of the cut. The reaction from the Kthar was dramatic. Quell emitted a high-pitched, chittering sound that the translation system didn't even attempt to interpret. Lyra's exoskeleton shifted colors slightly, displaying a pale blue tint that Alara hadn't seen before. Two students at the back of the group turned away entirely. Professor Zorpax remained watching, his posture rigid. "You are deliberately damaging tissue to repair damage," he observed, his voice modulated to maintain professional composure despite obvious distress. "It may appear that way," Alara acknowledged, placing a second neat stitch, "but each puncture is minimal compared to the benefit of keeping the wound closed properly." She continued working efficiently, placing 5 evenly spaced stitches along the length of the cut. The Kthar watched in what appeared to be a mixture of horror and fascination as she tied off the final knot and trimmed the excess thread. "There," Alara said, examining her handiwork with satisfaction. "Now I'll apply an antiseptic ointment and a protective covering." She removed a small tube of antibiotic cream and a sterile adhesive bandage from the kit, applying both in quick succession. "Procedure complete," she announced with a small smile, deliberately using terminology familiar to the Kthar. "Total treatment time, approximately 3 minutes." The medical bay had fallen completely silent. The students stood motionless, their exoskeletons displaying various color modulations that Alara suspected represented strong emotional responses. Professor Zorpax appeared to be running some kind of analysis on his personal device, mandibles working silently. Finally, Lyra broke the silence. You performed this self-modification without analgesic support. Alara nodded. The pain is minimal for a wound this size. Humans have variable pain tolerance, but most can handle suturing a small cut without anesthesia if necessary. Remarkable tolerance for self-induced trauma, murmured Quell, making notes on his datapad. Professor Zorpax approached, scanner extended. May I evaluate the result of your procedure? Of course, Alara replied, holding out her arm. The scanner hummed softly as it passed over the newly dressed wound. Zorpax studied the readings with intense focus, his primary eyes blinking in rapid sequence. The foreign materials, these sutures, remain within the tissue? He asked. Yes, they'll stay in place for about a week, Alara explained. By then, the wound will have healed enough to maintain its integrity. The sutures can be removed using sterile scissors or tweezers. And these materials do not cause rejection responses? The surgical thread is made of a biocompatible polymer, Alara said. It causes minimal tissue reaction. Zorpax made a note on his device. Most interesting. Our approach would have involved molecular tissue bonding and accelerated cellular regeneration. Your method seems surprisingly direct. Sometimes direct approaches have advantages, Alara suggested. They require fewer resources and can be performed almost anywhere with minimal equipment. A pragmatic perspective, Zorpax acknowledged, though his tone suggested he didn't necessarily consider pragmatism a virtue compared to optimal outcomes. The tension in the room had begun to dissipate, replaced by scientific curiosity. Several students had moved closer again, examining the bandaged wound with evident interest. I propose monitoring this injury's progression over the next 24 hours, Zorpax announced. Our diagnostic systems should track the efficacy of this alternative treatment methodology. I'm happy to provide data points, Alara agreed. Human wound healing follows a predictable pattern that should be interesting from a comparative xenobiology perspective. As the immediate crisis passed, Alara noticed the medical bay's automated systems had generated an incident report that was flashing on a nearby console. The report classification caught her attention. Anomalous patient intervention, protocol deviation, priority alert. Is there a problem with the report? She asked, nodding toward the console. Quell glanced at the display. Standard notification. Any deviation from recommended medical protocols triggers an automatic review by the station's medical oversight system. Will this cause administrative issues? Alara asked, suddenly concerned about potential diplomatic complications. Professor Zorpax made a dismissive gesture with his secondary limbs. The system merely requires documentation of reasoning and outcomes. As this situation involves cross-species medical practices, exceptions can be registered under scientific observation protocols. A message flashed across the console, and Zorpax reviewed it quickly. The medical oversight system has acknowledged the exception, but requires detailed documentation of the procedure for the xenobiology database. I'd be happy to provide that, Alara offered, including the historical context of suturing in human medicine. Zorpax appeared to consider this for a moment before responding. That would be educational. Perhaps you could prepare a formal presentation for the medical students. They should understand alternative approaches, even if our technology has rendered such methods obsolete for Cthar physiology. Alara recognized the diplomatic opening. I'd be delighted to share information about human emergency medical techniques. They might have applications in resource-limited scenarios that could be relevant to Cthar exploratory missions. An acceptable hypothesis, Zorpax agreed. We will schedule this educational exchange for tomorrow's cycle. For now, you are required to remain under observation for at least 12 hours to ensure no complications arise from your unorthodox treatment. Although Alara would have preferred to return to her quarters, she recognized that arguing further would undermine the tentative bridge being built. Understand. Would it be possible to have my work terminal brought here? I could use the time productively. Zorpax agreed to this reasonable request, and soon Alara found herself settled in a recovery area of the medical bay, arm comfortably positioned, with access to her research materials. The Kthar students rotated observation duties, with at least one present at all times, monitoring her condition and occasionally asking questions about human physiology. As the hours passed, Ilera noticed the students' questions becoming more nuanced and thoughtful. Lyra, in particular, seemed genuinely curious about the principles behind human first aid, rather than merely documenting an alien cultural practice. Your species evolved without an exoskeleton, Lyra observed during her observation shift. Did this vulnerability necessitate the development of these repair techniques? Ilera considered the question. That's an insightful perspective. Humans had to develop methods to protect and repair our soft tissues because we lack natural armor. Our medical techniques evolved from necessity, but they also allowed us greater physical flexibility and adaptability. A fascinating evolutionary trade-off, Lyra noted. Protection versus adaptability. The conversation continued along these lines, with Ilera explaining how human medicine had progressed from crude beginnings to sophisticated techniques, while still retaining fundamental approaches that had proven effective through millennia of practical application. When Quell took over the observation duty, his questions focused more on the physiological aspects of wound healing. The diagnostic scans indicate increased blood flow to the injured area. Is this a deliberate response? Yes, Ilera explained. The inflammatory response is the first stage of healing. Increased blood flow brings white blood cells to fight potential infection and delivers nutrients needed for tissue repair. Your bodies direct resources based on need, without external regulation. Quell seemed both surprised and impressed. Exactly. Human physiology includes numerous self-regulating systems that respond to injury or illness without conscious control. By the time the 12-hour observation period ended, Ilera's wound showed all the normal signs of early healing, slight inflammation but no infection, edges well approximated by the sutures, and minimal discomfort. The Kthar medical scanners confirmed what she already knew. The primitive treatment was working exactly as intended. Professor Zorpax arrived to review the final observation report. After studying the data, he made an announcement that surprised Ilera. The medical oversight system has updated its classification of this incident, he stated. The treatment method has been redesignated from anomalous intervention to alternative xenobiological procedure. Educational value confirmed. Your presentation on human emergency medical techniques has been formally added to the medical training curriculum. Ilera couldn't hide her smile. I'm honored, Professor. Cultural exchange should include practical knowledge as well as theoretical understanding. Indeed, Zorpax agreed, his tone suggesting a slight shift in perspective. Perhaps there is value in understanding methodologies that function effectively with minimal technological support. The next day, Ilera found herself in one of the station's teaching theaters, her first aid kit displayed on a demonstration table. A significantly larger group of Kthar students had assembled than she expected, not just the medical students she had met previously, but others from various scientific disciplines as well. Professor Zorpax introduced the session. Today's presentation addresses alternative medical approaches developed by human civilization. While technologically simpler than our methods, these techniques demonstrate interesting adaptations to resource constraints and physiological limitations. Ilera stepped forward. Thank you, Professor Zorpax. I'd like to begin by explaining the basic principles of human first aid, which focus on immediate response to injury using available resources. Over the next 2 hours, Ilera demonstrated various techniques from her first aid training: wound cleaning and dressing, different types of bandaging, splinting for fractures, and basic assessment protocols. The Kthar students observed with rapt attention, particularly when she explained the RIC protocol: rest, ice, compression, elevation, for soft tissue injuries. Your methods rely heavily on manual dexterity and observational assessment, noted one student. How do you ensure consistent outcomes without standardized measurement systems? Experience and training, Ilera explained. Human medical practitioners develop skills through practice and mentorship. While we use technology when available, we maintain these fundamental skills for situations where technology might be unavailable or impractical. A redundancy approach to medical knowledge, Quell observed approvingly. Logical when operating across varied environments with uncertain resource availability. The session extended well beyond its scheduled time as the students asked increasingly sophisticated questions. What had begun as a curious examination of primitive techniques had evolved into a genuine exchange of medical philosophies. One question from Lyra particularly struck Ilera. Does the experience of administering these manual techniques affect the practitioner's understanding of the injury in ways that automated systems might not capture? Ilera paused, impressed by the insight behind the question. That's a profound observation. Yes, there's a tactile understanding that comes from direct treatment. Experienced human doctors often speak of developing a feel for tissues and conditions that complements their technical knowledge. Fascinating, Lyra responded. Our medical training emphasizes objective measurement and standardized intervention. The concept of subjective assessment as a valuable diagnostic tool is novel. As the session concluded, Professor Zorpax approached Ilera. Your presentation has generated significant interest. Several faculty members have requested additional information about human medical approaches for comparative study. I'd be happy to provide more resources, Ilera replied. Perhaps we could establish an ongoing exchange of medical knowledge between our cultures. A reasonable proposal, Zorpax agreed. I have been authorized to establish a formal module on Terran emergency medical techniques within our Xenomedicine curriculum. Your assistance in developing this material would be appreciated. Coming from Zorpax, this was high praise indeed. I would be honored to contribute to such a project. In the days that followed, Ilera's relationship with the Cathar students changed noticeably. They approached her with new respect, seeking her perspective on various aspects of human physiology and medicine. Lyra and Quell, in particular, became regular visitors to her laboratory, often bringing questions that reflected deeper consideration of the differences between their species. One afternoon, approximately a week after the incident, Lyra arrived at Ilera's workspace with a small container. I have been researching traditional Cathar healing compounds that might be compatible with human physiology, she explained. This topical application contains regenerative enzymes that could supplement your natural healing processes. Ilera was touched by the gesture. Thank you, Lyra. This kind of knowledge exchange is exactly what the program was designed to facilitate. The compound should be applied after the removal of your sutures, Lyra continued, which, according to my calculations, should be appropriate at this time. Ilera examined her arm, where the wound had healed well, forming a thin pink line held by the now unnecessary stitches. You're right. Would you like to observe the removal process? It's quite straightforward. Lyra's antennae quivered with what Ilera now recognized as enthusiasm. That would be most educational. With Lyra watching intently, Ilera used small scissors and tweezers from her kit to carefully snip and remove each stitch. The Cathar student documented the process with her scanner, occasionally asking clarifying questions about technique. Remarkable efficiency, Lyra commented as Ilera removed the final stitch. No specialized equipment, minimal time requirement, and apparently minimal discomfort. Sometimes the simplest solutions are the most effective, Ilera replied, examining the healing scar. Now I'd be interested to try your regenerative compound, if you're confident it's safe for human use. I have verified compatibility through extensive simulation, Lyra assured her, opening the container to reveal a pearlescent gel. The compound was modified to accommodate human cellular structures. Ilera allowed Lyra to apply a small amount of the gel to her healing scar. The sensation was cool and slightly tingling, but not unpleasant. A true exchange of medical knowledge, Ilera observed with a smile. Your advanced biochemistry combined with our practical application techniques. An optimal integration of approaches, Lyra agreed, using terminology that, coming from Cathar, represented high praise indeed. 2 weeks later, Professor Zorpax called Ilera to his laboratory. When she arrived, she found him with Quell, examining data on a large display. Engineer Vance, Zorpax greeted her. We have been analyzing the comparative efficiency metrics of various medical interventions for minor tissue damage in different species. Interesting research, Ilera replied. Have you found any significant patterns? Indeed, Zorpax confirmed, bringing up a new set of data displays. When factoring for resource availability constraints, several of your basic human techniques demonstrate surprisingly favorable efficiency ratios. Ilera suppressed a smile at the professor's careful wording. For a Cthar scientist to acknowledge merit in technologically simpler approaches represented a significant shift in perspective. We have incorporated these findings into the emergency protocol recommendations for exploratory missions to resource-limited environments, Quell added, displaying a manual that clearly included diagrams of basic suturing techniques alongside more advanced Cthar medical procedures. I'm honored that you found value in our approaches, Ilera said sincerely. Zorpax's mandibles clicked in what Ilera had come to recognize as his version of thoughtful consideration. Perhaps the most valuable aspect of the exchange program is not the sharing of advanced technologies, but the recognition that different evolutionary paths create different yet equally valid solutions to universal challenges. Coming from Professor Zorpax, this philosophical observation represented a profound admission. Ilera nodded respectfully. Diversity of approach strengthens us all. The Cthar commitment to theoretical perfection and the human emphasis on practical adaptation each have their place in the universe. Indeed, Zorpax agreed. The station's medical curriculum has been permanently modified to include what we now term resource-adaptive treatment protocols, a more accurate description than primitive techniques, I believe. Ilera smiled. Much more accurate, yes. In the months that followed, Ilera's position on Station Xylos evolved beyond her original research parameters. She became a regular contributor to the medical education program, helping Cthar students understand not just human physiology, but the philosophy behind human medical approaches. The scar on her arm faded to a thin white line, barely visible except under close examination. Lyra's regenerative compound had indeed accelerated the final stages of healing. The minor injury that had caused such consternation had become a symbol of something much more significant. The bridge between two medical traditions separated by different evolutionary paths, but united in their commitment to healing. During her final week on the station, before returning to Earth, Ilera was surprised to receive a formal commendation from the Cthar Science Academy. The citation praised her significant contribution to cross-species medical knowledge exchange and demonstration of alternative methodological approaches with practical applications. More meaningful than the official recognition, however, was the small gift presented to her by Lyra and Quell, a specially designed emergency medical kit that combined human-style basic supplies with modified Cthar healing compounds compatible with human physiology. For your future explorations, Lyra explained, an optimal integration of our medical traditions. The best of both worlds, Ilera agreed, accepting the gift with genuine emotion. Theoretical perfection and practical application, working together. The day before her scheduled departure, Ilera received an unexpected message from the station's administrative system. Her presence was requested at a formal ceremony in the Central Assembly Hall. No additional details were provided, leaving her curious about this final official function. When she arrived at the specified time, Ilera was surprised to find not only the medical students she had worked with, but a much larger gathering of Cthar scientists, administrators, and even several representatives from other species stationed on Xylos. Professor Zorpax stood at the center of the assembly platform, his exoskeleton polished to a brilliant sheen that indicated the formal nature of the occasion. Engineer Ilera Vance, Zorpax announced as she approached, his voice modulated for the official record. The Scientific Council of Station Xylos is convened to recognize your contributions to interspecies medical exchange. Ilera felt a rush of unexpected emotion as she took her place beside the professor. What had begun as a simple demonstration of basic first aid had apparently resonated far beyond her original intentions. Zorpax continued, addressing the assembled gathering. The incident, classified as Alternative Medical Intervention Protocol 7329, has led to a comprehensive reassessment of our emergency response protocols for diverse physiological systems. A holographic display activated above the assembly, showing a series of medical procedure adaptations that clearly incorporated elements of both Kthar precision technology and human practical methodologies. These hybrid protocols, Zorpax explained, have been tested in simulated emergency scenarios with a 37.2% improvement in resource efficiency and a 29.6% reduction in treatment time for non-critical injuries across 17 different species physiologies. Murmurs of approval rippled through the assembly, a significant reaction from the typically reserved Kthar. Lyra stepped forward, holding what appeared to be a data crystal mounted in an ornate display case. The complete documentation of this medical exchange has been encoded for transmission to both Earth Medical Exchange Authority and the Galactic Medical Repository, she announced. Additionally, this physical record has been prepared for Engineer Vance to return to Earth's exchange program. As Alara accepted the crystal, she noticed intricate engravings along its housing, Kthar's symbolic notation that she recognized as representing both their species, surrounded by ancient healing symbols from both cultures. "This is an extraordinary honor," Alara said, genuinely moved. "When I applied tissue adhesive to that cut, I never imagined it would lead to this level of exchange." A ripple of what could only be described as Kthar amusement moved through the assembly, a subtle harmonic clicking that their translator systems rendered as polite appreciation of her understatement. Quell approached next, carrying what appeared to be a modified medical scanner. "We have adapted one of our diagnostic devices to incorporate assessment parameters based on your intuitive evaluation techniques," he explained. "It now includes a mode that prompts the user to perform manual examination alongside technological assessment, particularly in field conditions with limited power resources." Alara examined the device with genuine surprise. "You've created a hybrid approach that combines both our methodologies." "Indeed," Zorpax confirmed. "Our analysis demonstrated that while Kthar technological solutions provide superior outcomes in controlled environments, the human approach offers significant advantages in variable conditions. The optimal solution was clearly integration rather than segregation of techniques." Coming from a Kthar scientist, particularly one as traditionally minded as Zorpax, this represented a profound shift in perspective. The ceremony concluded with a formal recording of Alara demonstrating several emergency medical techniques, now performed with subtle adaptations that incorporated Kthar precision tools alongside human practical methodology. This demonstration would remain in the station's educational database long after her departure. As the assembly dispersed, several Kthar students approached to express their appreciation in their characteristically formal manner. Lyra, however, stepped closer than Kthar typically would in professional settings. "Your instruction has altered my approach to medical research," she said quietly. "I have requested assignment to the next Kthar delegation to Earth to continue our medical exchange." "I'll look forward to continuing our work together," Alara replied warmly. "The Earth Exchange Center would benefit greatly from your perspective." The following morning, as she prepared to board the transport that would begin her journey back to Earth, Professor Zorpax approached for a final exchange. "Your presence has been educational, Engineer Vance," he said formally, but with a warmth that had been absent in their first encounters. "As has yours, Professor," Alara replied. "I've learned as much from Kthar as I hope you've learned from me." "Perhaps more than anticipated," Zorpax acknowledged. "Our medical curricula will continue to reference your demonstrations long after your departure." Alara smiled. "And I'll carry the lessons I've learned here back to Earth. Perhaps some modified Kthar techniques will find their way into our emergency medical training as well." An appropriate reciprocal exchange, Zorpax agreed. His mandibles clicked in what Alara now recognized as the Kthar expression of respect. "Safe journey, Alara Vance." As she boarded the transport, Alara was surprised to find a small package waiting in her assigned compartment. Opening it, she discovered an elegant container holding several vials of the regenerative compound Lyra had developed, along with detailed application instructions translated into standard Earth medical terminology. A small note accompanied the gift for future injuries that require both pragmatic intervention and optimal outcomes. Lyra, Quell, and the medical exchange students of Xylos. As the transport departed from Station Xylos, Elara looked back at the gleaming structure against the backdrop of stars. What had begun with a minor cut and a major cultural misunderstanding had evolved into something far more valuable than either culture could have achieved alone. She ran her fingers over the barely perceptible scar on her arm. Sometimes the most profound connections began with the simplest things, like teaching aliens how to stitch a wound. 3 months after her return to Earth, Elara received notification that the first formal Cthar medical exchange delegation would be arriving at the International Space Platform. The delegation would include not only Lyra, now designated as a specialist in cross-species emergency medicine, but also 7 other Cthar medical researchers specifically selected to study human intuitive diagnostic techniques. More surprising was the list of materials they were bringing, including prototype versions of hybrid medical tools that combined Cthar precision technology with human-inspired ergonomic designs intended for manual operation in field conditions. Elara smiled as she reviewed the manifest. The small scar on her arm had faded almost completely now, but its impact continued to expand across the stars. In the vast history of interspecies relations, this tiny moment of cultural misunderstanding, a simple cut and its unexpected treatment, would likely never merit more than a footnote. Yet for those directly involved, it had fundamentally altered perspectives on both sides. She composed a response to the notification, formally accepting the position as Earth's liaison officer for the incoming Cthar delegation. At the end, she added a personal note to Lyra, looking forward to continuing our work together. I've been practicing with the regenerative compound you provided. Remarkable results. Bring your first aid kit. I'll bring mine. Together, we'll build something better than either of us could create alone. As she sent the message into the depths of space toward the approaching Cthar vessel, Elara reflected that this was how true progress happened, not through grand declarations or massive technological leaps, but through small moments of genuine exchange. A cut, a stitch, a moment of cultural shock, followed by curiosity, respect, and ultimately, collaboration. The universe, like a healing wound, was slowly being stitched together, one unexpected connection at a time.